we're not necessarily talking about writing today. We're actually talking about imagination. Imagination. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. I've been on kind of a kick talking about things related to risk and talking about this idea that you need to go out and try different things, and you need to go out and try different types of writing, and you need to be willing to show your writing to people and just take risks in general to be a writer. I'm not talking about risks that are going to put your life at danger, because that's a little different. You know, there are certain instances where you should put your life at danger, depending on the risk versus reward, but in most cases you shouldn't. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the risk of being embarrassed, the risk of someone thinking that you're stupid, the risk of you feeling stupid yourself, different things like that, the risk of discouragement, the risk of people being mad at you even, different things like that. And connected to risk, connected to this idea that we need to try different things, is the idea of imagination or creativity or whatever you want to call it. And I've talked about imagination in the past, and I've talked about this need again and again and again because I think it is something very good. I've talked about this need to have a lot of experiences to draw from. And this might be more important than being the best writer in the world. If you have tons of experiences to draw from and you aren't a great writer, people are still going to connect those to those experiences. People are still going to find what you're writing interesting because you've had more experiences to draw from to bring it into your writing itself. And if you're the best writer in the world, but you have no interesting experiences to draw from, your writing is going to sound great, but then it might fall flat. If that makes sense. You might be enticed. People might be enticed by your writing. They might be like, man, this is excellent writing. I love it so much. But then they get done with it. They're like, I really didn't connect to that book. It's kind of like really good cinematography, right? If there's no core movie at the center that's really good, if there's nothing good there, if it's just all flashy, it moves fast, it looks good. It's like the new Star Wars movies. I'm sorry if you like it, but that's kind of what I think. It's like a lot of movies today, actually. I'm not just ripping on those. It's like a lot of movies today where there's all this flash, there's all these good-looking scenes, but there's no story that's being told. And most people who go to the movie theater, or most people who sit down on their couch to watch a movie or a television series, are doing it for the story and the characters and what happens to those characters themselves. So getting rid of good ideas and just replacing it with good writing is the same thing. It will look really good. It'll probably entertain people, but it won't stick with them. It won't stick with them in their emotions because it actually doesn't have an emotional core. So you need to have different experiences. And I want to talk about how those experiences work, how those experiences come into you and how they flow out of you at the same time. Not at the same time, but we're talking about it at the same time. So in the past, I think this is a good example, but I think it doesn't go far enough. I don't think it understands completely what imagination is or what people are drawing from when they're writing. All right. I've heard of imagination as a compost pile. So you have all these different types of experiences and they all go into this compost pile. And if you don't know how a compost pile works, when you have a compost pile, you take all your old food. Usually you get rid of your proteins, I believe. But you take all your fibers, you take all your other types of food, and you throw it into a bucket or whatever you're going to do, and you stick a lid on it, and then it rots, essentially. It composts. It turns back into dirt, if we want to say that. And it's really fertile, and it's really good for planting stuff. And what I've heard in the past is people say, you bring all your different ideas in and you put them in your mind and you kind of forget about them. and then these ideas compost together, and then people pull from this compost of ideas, and then they have these good ideas that they can use, or they can string together ideas in a specific way that people like a lot, that just connect to people in a way that they wouldn't connect to otherwise, and that's how they write. And I think that to a certain degree it is like that, but I think that it's less like a compost pile and more it's more like playing an instrument. It's more like improvising on a piano or something like that, because if I don't know how to play a piano and if I don't know how everything works, then I can't improvise well. But the better I can play a piano, and the better I practice improvisation, the better I'm going to be able to do it. So when I first start to learn how to do something, when I first start to learn how to tell a story, I'm not going to be able to draw a lot of different ideas from my mind to bring into that story. But the more I practice, the more I work with stories, the more I think even planning helps with this too. The more I plan my stories, the more I'm going to be able to bring stuff in, because I'm going to be like, oh, I like that idea. I like this idea. If you get good enough at something, you can essentially do it without thinking, right? It's technically not thinking, but your brain jumps ahead. It creates a shorter circuit to the end result. So you can do it without consciously thinking is what I mean. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create a situation where you are not consciously thinking about certain aspects of your writing, such as how the words flow together. And then you can bring in other aspects because you free up your mind to bring in those other aspects. So I think it's more like having a really, really well-developed skill. And I guess it is a really, really well-developed skill if you can do this. And then since you have all these ideas, you pull them forward. I think you actually have to practice connecting things together in strange ways, right? Because when I was younger, I would connect things together in strange ways, but they'd be interesting, they'd be weird, etc., but they wouldn't come out in a way that I liked. They weren't professional, they weren't good. They were bad. They were put together in bad ways, they were sloppy, right? But as I continued to throw things together in strange ways, I actually started to be more traditional in my approach to writing. But I can still approach it in weird ways because I still have that experience. Right? So I don't think it's necessarily throwing things into a compost and letting them compost and things popping out of your mind. It's more like working with a file cabinet, right? You have this wall of file cabinets or something like that, and you have the ability to open one up whenever you want, and it can find the exact file whenever you want. Right? It's kind of like using that, and it's kind of like being a detective and you're trying to work on a case. And the more cases you work on, the more you understand your file cabinet system, so you memorize where things are in your file cabinet system. So that's what I think it's more like with this idea of imagination. You're bringing tons of things into your brain, you're adding more and more and more, but you know how to access them, you know where to access them, and you don't know where to access them all the time. But when you need them, you're like, oh, I know where that one is, because your mind's already moving in that direction. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support me, there's really one simple thing you can do. You can go to danielpoppie.com/newsletter and sign up for my newsletter. And when you sign up, you'll actually be able to get access to my publication roadmap. So that's everything I have planned for pretty much every project I have into the next decade. Again, that is danielpoppie.com/newsletter. You can also find the link below.